All right, welcome to the first mm, episode of the second season of the Henry George Daily Devotional. I don't know. We're reading Social Problems by Henry George now. This is with the Georgism Discord server. Then shall they also answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, or athirst, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister unto thee? Then shall he answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you did it not to one of the least of these, ye did it not to me. Matthew. That's the book of Matthew in the Bible. Note, this book was written in New York in 1883, which will explain references made in its pages to time and place. My endeavor has been to present the momentous social problems of our time, unencumbered by technicalities, and without that abstract reasoning which some of the principles of political economy require for thorough explanation. I've spoken in this book of some points not touched upon, or but lightly touched upon, in progress and poverty. But there are other points as to which I think it would be worth the while of those who may be interested by this book to read that. Yes, everyone go read Progress and Poverty. If only there were a podcast or a YouTube series where you could do that. Let's look at our contents. There's our contents. You know, I don't really like the. There's probably a view. We got 22 chapters and an appendix. Hmm. Can I download this? Yes, of course. And then we can fit to width is pretty good. I don't know. All right. Social problems. Hmm. Hmm. Social anxiety. Social problems, chapter 1. The increasing importance of social questions. There come moments in our lives that summon all our powers, when we feel that, casting away illusions, we must decide and act with our utmost intelligence and energy. So in the lives of peoples come periods specially calling for earnestness and intelligence. We seem to have entered one of these periods. Over and again have nations and civilizations been confronted with problems which, like the riddle of the Sphinx, not to answer was to be destroyed. But never before have problems so vast and intricate been presented. This is not strange. That the closing years of this century must bring up momentous social questions follows from the material and intellectual progress that has marked its course. There's always something that pushes you to your limits. Well, I don't know about limits. There's always something that's the hardest thing you did, a little by definition. Between the development of society and the development of species, there's a close analogy. Somebody's been underlining. In the lowest forms of animal life, there is little difference of parts. Both wants and powers are few and simple. Movement seems automatic, and instincts are scarcely distinguishable from those of the vegetable. So homogeneous are some of these living things that if cut in pieces, each piece still lives. But as life rises into higher manifestations, simplicity gives way to complexity. The parts develop into organs having separate functions and reciprocal relations. New wants and powers arise, and a greater and greater degree of intelligence is needed to secure food and avoid danger. Did fish, bird, or beast possess no higher intelligence than the polyp, nature could bring them forth only to die. This law that the increasing complexity and delicacy of organization, which give higher capacity and increased power, are accompanied by increased wants and dangers, and require therefore increased intelligence, runs through nature. In the ascending scale of life, at last comes man, the most highly and delicately organized of animals. Yet not only do his higher powers require for their use a higher intelligence than exists in other animals, but without higher intelligence he could not live. His skin is too thin, his nails too brittle. He is too poorly adapted for running, climbing, swimming, or burrowing. Were he not gifted with intelligence greater than that of any beast, he would perish from cold, starve from inability to get food, or be exterminated by animals better equipped for the struggle in which brute instinct suffices. In man, however, the intelligence which increases all through nature's rising scale passes at one bound into an intelligence so superior that the difference seems of kind rather than degree. In him, that narrow and seemingly unconscious intelligence that we call instinct becomes conscious reason, and the godlike power of adaptation and invention makes feeble man nature's king. But with man the ascending line stops. Animal life assumes no higher form, nor can we affirm that, in all his generations, man as an animal has a whit improved. But progression in another line begins. Where the development of species ends, social development commences, and that advance of society we call civilization. So increases human powers that between savage and civilized man there is a gulf so vast as to suggest the gulf between the highly organized animal and the oyster glued to the rocks. And with every advance upon this line, new vistas open, when we try to think what knowledge and power progressive civilization may give to the men of the future, imagination fails. In this progression which begins with man, as in that which leads up to him, the same law holds. Each advance makes a demand for higher and higher intelligence. With the beginnings of society arises the need for social intelligence, for that consensus of individual intelligence which forms a public opinion, a public conscience, a public will, and is manifested in law, institutions, and administration. Seems like a very roundabout way of getting at whatever he's getting at. But all right, the social condition of man as animal, transcending animal, I guess that's where we're beginning. Yes. As society develops, a higher and higher degree of this social intelligence is required, for the relation of individuals to each other becomes more intimate and important, and the increasing complexity of the social organization brings liability to new dangers. Excuse me. I wonder if George had in mind the difficulties arising from a family whose husband and wife divorced and the two kids live on opposite sides of the country and figuring out where they should all have Christmas together and who wants to actually be around one another. Good thing I'm such a smart human that I can successfully, well, remains to be seen, navigate these socially treacherous waters of Christmas celebration. I'm sure that's what George was talking about. I finished the sentence. For the relation of industries is more important. The increase brings liability to new dangers. Yes. In the rude beginning, each family produces its own food, makes its own clothes, builds its own house, and when it moves, furnishes its own transportation. Compare with this independence the intricate interdependence of the denizens of a modern city. They may supply themselves with greater certainty and a much greater variety and abundance than the savage, but it is by the cooperation of thousands. Even the water they drink and the artificial light they use are brought to them by elaborate machinery, requiring the constant labor and watchfulness of many men. They may travel at a speed incredible to the savage, but in doing so resign life and limb to the care of others. A broken rail, a drunken engineer, a careless switchman may hurl them to eternity. And the power of, yeah, I was thinking about this, you know, because I was in a motor vehicle traveling along the Southern California freeways, and there were a number of other cars zipping past us, cutting across lanes, and it's just every time I drive, which is, almost every day, it's so. I mean, I made a really big driving error last weekend. I just I was parked and I just pulled out in front of somebody, and they had to slam on their brakes and they honked, understandably. Uh, it's this weird, yeah, I don't know. That's Cars are not wholly bad. I don't think that. But anyway, they don't seem the best for so many of our purposes. Okay. Um, so we read about how the switchman may hurl us to eternity, and the power of applying labor to the satisfaction of desire passes in the same way beyond the direct control of the individual. This is very related to men seek to satisfy their desires with the least exertion. The laborer becomes but part of a great machine, which may at any time be paralyzed by causes beyond his power or even his foresight. Thus does the well-being of each become more and more dependent upon the well-being of all, the individual more and more subordinate to society. George, throughout his writing, always uses like the male pronouns. Of course, he was writing in 1883, this book. Uh, I'm not. Every time I read it, his foresight, his power. I feel this slight embarrassment, or I don't know. It's like, oh, this is sexist, but it's old, and so it's not such a big deal. And then there's this little piece of me that's like, oh, the economy of language is kind of nice that we're not having to say by causes beyond his or her power, or even his or her foresight, or one's power or one's foresight. I don't know, I just wanted to share with you my internal struggle over this gendered language from 130 years ago. 145-ish years ago. What is it? 2024 minus 1883. 141 years. I could have. It's just scary doing math in front of people. The highly civilized. Okay, and so come. Wait. Yes, his or her power, even his or her foresight. Thus does the well-being of each become more and more dependent upon the well-being of all, the individual more and more subordinate to society. and so come new dangers. The rude society resembles the creatures that, though cut into pieces, will live. The highly civilized society is like a highly organized animal. A stab in a vital part, the suppression of a single function, is death. A savage village may be burned and its people driven off, but used to direct recourse to nature, they can maintain themselves. Highly civilized man, however, accustomed to capital, to machinery, to the minute division of labor, becomes helpless when suddenly deprived of these and thrown upon nature. Under the factory, now we're getting somewhere. Under the factory system, some 60 persons, with the aid of much costly machinery, cooperate to the making of a pair of shoes. But of the 60, not one could make a whole shoe. This is the tendency in all branches of production. Yeah, I think modern economists, one of them got all famous because he talked about no one knows how to make a pencil or something. Economist, no one can make a pencil. Okay, yeah, it's Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman. Not a single person in the world can make a pencil. I suspect George wasn't the first person to make this observation either. However, I would argue that it has sort of popped up in the brain of many different humans, not from directly reading it or hearing it from someone else, for whatever that's worth. This is the tendency in all branches of production, even in agriculture. How many farmers of the new generation can use the flail? How many farmers' wives can now make a coat from the wool? Yeah, I was just talking to my mom about how does how do they make threads from cotton? It's just crazy to me. I don't like you give me a couple balls of cotton and you're like, "All right, not, you know, yeah, make clothing from this cotton." I Magnets, how do they work? Many of our farmers do not even make their own butter or raise their own vegetables. There is an enormous gain in productive power from this division of labor, which assigns to the individual the production of but a few of of the things, or even but a small part of one of the things he needs. He needs and makes each dependent upon others with whom he never comes in contact, but the social organization becomes more sensitive. A primitive village community may pursue the even tenor of its life without feeling disasters which overtake other villages but a few miles off. But in the closely knit civilization to which we have attained, a war, a scarcity, a commercial crisis in one hemisphere produces powerful effects in the other, while shocks and jars from which a primitive community easily recovers would to a highly civilized community mean wreck. We definitely have gotten even more globalized than in George's time, and I honestly think this is one of the uh not exactly misconceptions, but one of the reasons why it seems like a lot of what George's predictions of doom and gloom didn't quite come. I think it's because the poverty that has arisen alongside of a lot of the U.S.'s progress is in other countries. Uh, yes, the land is really expensive in New York City, much more so than the middle of Montana, but land in the middle of Montana is much more valuable than land in the middle of Africa or middle of nowhere China, I think. I sure think. Um, And I think globalization and, well, I was going to start listing things that enable globalization, but globalization has linked all land much more closer together. And it becomes hard for us in the good land for us to see a lot of that poverty. There's still plenty of nearby poverty that's also hard for us to see because we drive in our cars from nice place to nice place, island of wealth to island of wealth. But it's so funny, there was a bunch of traffic on the freeway, insert rant about traffic here, that driving back from UCLA for my dad's medical treatment, state of the art, super expensive medical treatment at UCLA, one of the greatest medical institutions on this planet in all time. We took the freeway back. Of course, tons and tons of traffic. So we thought, why not just get off and take this side road? And suddenly, for the like 10 miles near my house that I zip past on the freeway every day, I'm passing through all these neighborhoods that are not beautiful, do not have well landscaped, regularly irrigated greenery surrounding the houses. And it's just strip mall after strip mall. It's even like hard, yeah. Uh, but nonetheless, those strip malls are still, in many ways, pretty wealthy, pretty glorious compared to rural Mexico. All right. Anyway, um, George is back to talking about our civilized community. How? Oh, okay. So this is just the whole chapter. And the thing is, this is not searchable. Is it? No, that's kind of a bummer. I can't highlight, I can't search. But we have page numbers. Hmm. Well, I think this might conclude my first reading of social problems. We did not make it through our chapter, but that's okay. I will be back. All right. See ya. All right. We are continuing reading Social Problems by Henry George. Increasing importance of social questions. We're on page 5 of the first chapter. Henry George writes, "It is startling to think how destructive in a civilization like ours would be such fierce conflicts as fill the history of the past." Spoiler alert, World War I and II are coming soon, George. The wars of highly civilized countries since the opening of the era of steam and machinery have been duels of armies rather than conflicts of peoples or classes. Our only glimpse of what might happen, were passion fully aroused, was in the struggle of the Paris Commune. And since 1870 to the knowledge of petroleum has been added that of even more destructive agents. The explosion of a little nitroglycerin under a few water mains would make a great city uninhabitable. The blowing up of a few railroad bridges and tunnels would bring famine quicker than the wall of circumvallation that Titus drew around Jerusalem. The pumping of atmospheric air into the gas mains and the application of a match would tear up every street and level every house. The 30 Years' War set back civilization in Germany So fierce a war now would all but destroy it. Well, George would be surprised to learn how quickly people bounce back from these world wars. Not merely have destructive powers vastly increased, but the whole social organization has become vastly more delicate. In a simpler state, master and man, neighbor and neighbor know each other, and there is that touch of the elbow which, in times of danger, enables society to rally. But present tendencies are to the loss of this. In London, dwellers in one house do not know those in the next. The tenants of adjoining rooms are utter strangers to each other. Let civil conflict break or paralyze the authority that preserves order, and the vast population will become a terror-stricken mob. Without point of rally or principle of cohesion, and your London would be sacked and burned by an army of thieves. London is only the greatest of great cities. What is true of London is true of New York, and in the same measure true of the many cities whose hundreds of thousands are steadily growing toward millions. These vast aggregations of humanity, where he who seeks isolation may find it more truly than in the desert, where wealth and poverty touch and jostle, where one revels and another starves within a few feet of each other, yet separated by as great a gulf as that fixed between, Dives in hell and Lazarus in Abraham's bosom. They are centers and types of our civilization. Let jar or shock dislocate the complex and delicate organization. Let the policeman's club be thrown down or wrested from him, and the foundations of the great deep are opened, and quicker than ever before chaos comes again. Strong as it may seem, our civilization is evolving destructive forces. Not desert and forest, but city slums and country roadsides are nursing the barbarians who may be to the new excuse me, what Hun and Vandal were to the old. Nor should we forget that in civilized man still lurks the savage, the men who in past times oppressed or revolted, who fought to the death in petty quarrels and drunk fury with blood. In petty quarrels and drunk fury with blood, who burned cities and rent empires, were men essentially such as those we meet daily. Social progress has accumulated knowledge, softened manners, refined tastes, and extended sympathies, but man is yet capable of as blind a rage as when, clothed in skins, he fought wild beasts with a flint. And present tendencies, in some respects at least, threaten to kindle passions that have so often before flamed in destructive fury. There is in all the past nothing to compare with the rapid changes now going on in the civilized world. It seems as though, hello Diggs, it seems as though in the European race and in the 19th century, man was just beginning to live, just grasping his tools and becoming conscious of his powers. The snail's pace of crawling ages has suddenly become the headlong rush of the locomotive, speeding faster and faster. This rapid progress is primarily in industrial methods and materials, but industrial changes imply social changes and necessitate political changes. I'm guessing these underlinings are from Dan Sullivan. Maybe who it's from Cooperative Individualism, which is this is by Edward Dobson. This is his website. I don't know if he's the one who actually put in the effort to scan these documents, to scan this in. Who knows who did the underlining? Someone knows. Progressive societies outgrow institutions as children outgrow clothes. Social progress always requires greater intelligence in the management of public affairs, but this the more as progress is rapid and change quicker. and that the rapid changes now going on are bringing up problems that demand most earnest attention may be seen on every hand. Symptoms of danger, premonitions of violence are appearing all over the civilized world. Creeds are dying, beliefs are changing. The old forces of conservatism are melting away. Political institutions are failing as clearly in democratic America as in monarchical Europe. There is growing unrest and bitterness among the masses. Whatever be the form of government, a blind groping for escape from conditions becoming intolerable. Whatever be the form of government, a blind groping for escape from conditions becoming intolerable. There is a growing unrest and bitterness. I don't know. To attribute all this to the teachings of demagogues is like attributing the fever to the quickened pulse. It is the new wine beginning to ferment in old bottles. Yeah. Um, hmm. I guess the idea that this is all because of some new popular ideas. I don't know. Hard, hard to be so confident of any one source, and yet George will be the one claiming that it mostly has to do with land. And I've come around to his opinion, and it is probably one of the bigger uh, not counter arguments, but the feeling that I get from some people when arguing about this is that their intuition says that it's too simple that the land value tax would fix everything. Granted, I don't think it would fix everything, uh, but I think it's fundamental. And I think we've spent a long time living in societies and developing culture around a land possessing model. To put into a sailing ship the powerful engines of a first-class ocean steamer would be to tear her to pieces with their play. So the new powers rapidly changing all the relations of society must shatter social and political organizations not adapted to meet their strain. To adjust our institutions to growing needs and changing conditions is the task which devolves upon us. Devolver. Prudence, patriotism, human sympathy, and religious sentiment alike are called upon us to undertake it. There is danger. Oh, I am recording. Oh. I don't remember clicking start recording. Oh man, there's danger in reckless change, but greater danger in blind conservatism. Blind conservatism. I suppose this was written before Chesterton coined his, well, he didn't coin the term Chesterton's fence. He just described the fence. Chesterton's fence is the idea that when you come across a fence, before you just knock it down because it seems to you that it would be not good to not have the fence there, you ought to investigate why the fence was built in the first place. Who knows if it's keeping out or keeping in, very important things. And so we have to think about that when we are doing reform to our laws and yeah, evaluating inherited beliefs or systems from the past. Why did they exist? I think the YIMBY movement sort of fails Chesterton's fence dilemma when it comes to uh, the housing policy. They only want to destroy zoning, and if they're not a YIMBY Georgist, they're not going to address the reason that the zoning was created in the beginning. Even though the zoning only addresses the problems of slums and tenement housing and overcrowding and unsanitary conditions, for a small segment of society. So grave, the problems beginning to confront us are grave, so grave that there is fear they may not be solved in time to prevent great catastrophes. But their gravity comes from indisposition to recognize frankly and grapple boldly with them. These dangers, which menace not one country alone, but modern civilization itself, do but show that a higher civilization is struggling to be born, that the needs and the aspirations of men have outgrown conditions and institutions that before sufficed. I don't know. I've been reading Albert J. Nock, who was a Georgist in the early 20th century, and he talks about how most people don't read, by which he means most people don't read well, they don't pay attention, they don't think about what they're reading. I guess I was just questioning whether or not to. Well, again, I want to read this material. I guess it just doesn't hurt to put it online. But part of me wants to. I don't know. I've clearly this is for the book club, the George's book club, and I have been slacking off and haven't been doing the book club reading because I've been reading Albert J. Nock's work. Uh, I don't know. Do we stop here or do we finish this chapter? Oh, it's only 9 pages. I thought it was 11. Well then, we'll finish it. A civilization which tends to concentrate wealth and power in the hands of a fortunate few and to make of others mere human machines must inevitably evolve anarchy and bring destruction. But a civilization is possible in which the poorest could have all the comforts and conveniences now enjoyed by the rich, in which prisons and almshouses would be needless, and charitable societies unthought of. Such a civilization waits only for the social intelligence that will adapt means to ends. Powers that might give plenty to all are already in our hands. Though there is poverty and want, there is yet seeming embarrassment from the very excess of wealth-producing forces. Give us but a market, say manufacturers, and we will supply goods without end. Give us but work, cry idle men. The evils that begin to appear spring from the fact that the application of intelligence to social affairs has not kept pace with the application of intelligence to individual needs and material ends. Natural science strides forward, but political science lags. With all our progress in the arts, which produce wealth, we have made no progress in securing its equitable distribution. Knowledge has vastly increased. Industry and commerce have been revolutionized. But whether free trade or protection, that's another book of his. So this was written Henry George Social Problems. All right, well. So protection or free trade was 1886. I see. So this was 1883, and in 3 years he writes Protection or Free Trade. And 4 years prior to this is when he published Progress and Poverty. And I guess 1881 is when he wrote The Irish Land Question. I did not do a good job of reading our land and land policy for the um, Henry George, the Georgism book club. All right, where were we? Knowledge has vastly increased. Free trade or protection is best for a nation. We are not yet fully agreed. We have bought machinery. We have brought machinery to a pitch of perfection that 50 years ago could not have been imagined. But in the presence of political corruption, we seem as helpless as idiots. Yeah, that's a good. Sorry. The East River Bridge is a crowning triumph of mechanical skill, but to get it built, a leading citizen of Brooklyn had to carry to New York $60,000 in a carpet bag to bribe New York aldermen. The human soul that thought out the great bridge is prisoned in a crazed and broken body that lies bedfast and could watch it grow only by peering through a telescope. Nevertheless, the weight of the immense mass is estimated and adjusted for every inch. But the skill of the engineer could not prevent condemned wire being smuggled into the cable. This reminds me of the remarkable craftsmanship that goes into big budget movies like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and big budget video games. It is incredible how skilled and how clever the workers are, and yet the object they're making in these forms of art is so redundant and boring and just like juvenile, like persistently juvenile. The progress of civilization requires that more and more intelligence be devoted to social affairs, and this not the intelligence of the few, but that of the many. We cannot safely leave politics to politicians or political economy to college professors. We cannot safely leave politics to politicians or political economy to college professors. The people themselves must think because the people alone can act. In a journal of civilization, a professed teacher declares the saving word for society to be that each shall mind his own business. This is the gospel of selfishness, soothing as soft flutes to those who, having fared well themselves, think everybody should be satisfied. But the salvation of society, the hope for the free, full development of humanity, is in the gospel of brotherhood, the gospel of Christ. Social progress makes the well-being of all more and more the business of each. It binds all closer and closer together in bonds from which none can escape. He who observes the law and the proprieties and cares for his family, yet takes no interest in the general weal and gives no thought to those who are trodden under foot, save now and then to bestow alms, is not a true Christian, nor is he a good citizen. The duty of the citizen is more and harder than this. Nowadays we say the duty is to go vote, and voting is a sick reward or a sick distraction from true self-governance. The intelligence required for the solving of social problems is not a thing of the mere intellect. It must be animated with the religious sentiment and warm with sympathy for human suffering. It must stretch out beyond self-interest, whether it be the self-interest of the few or of the many. It must seek justice, for at the bottom of every social problem we will find a social wrong. Whoa! That's sort of interesting to think that, I don't know, it's a subtle thing that every social problem has a social wrong. There's some kind of like blame that can be attributed I mean, maybe some people will be like, yeah, that's just like almost tautological. A social problem by definition has a run, but it's like, some people, there's this sense that like we have social problems and then that it's just like inevitable or random or something. But anyway, all right, good work, everybody. Recording done.